America is in the midst of its largest housing bubble of all time here in September 2021. And if you don't believe me, just take a look at the data, folks. Home prices adjusted for inflation, all-time high. Year-over-year home price growth, all-time high. All with the backdrop of a global pandemic and recession that's caused America to lose 5 million jobs over the last 18 months. As a result, a lot of you guys out there, potential home buyers and real estate investors, are sitting on the sidelines waiting for this crash to occur before you step in and buy into the market. And I think that makes total sense and is a smart thing to do. However, I'm making this video to show you guys that there are actually still certain cities across the country that are good places to buy real estate right now. Certain areas still offer you affordability, growth potential, and high cash flows, and you can even buy a brand new home for close to $200,000 in these cities. So if you are someone who's looking to buy a home and maybe relocate to a more affordable market, or if you're a real estate investor who's looking to find a value-driven, high cash flow investment opportunity, you're going to want to watch this video. I'm going to give you the hard data and narrow these markets down to the 5 that offer the best value proposition here for home buyers and real estate investors in 2021. Let's get into it, folks. And we're going to get started by looking at a map like we usually do. And on this map, we're looking at the largest 500 metro areas in America. You can think of this as the largest 500 housing markets in America. And we're comparing them on the basis of home affordability. How expensive or cheap is it to buy a home across America? And here's what the color coding on the map shows. The greener the market looks, the more affordable it is to buy a home, the cheaper home prices are. The redder the market looks, the more expensive it is. And I think the first thing that you guys are probably noticing here is that there's a big geographic divide across America. If we were to just draw a line basically separating the east and western halves of the country, we can see the western half has a lot of red, which means expensive home prices. The typical price in Denver is $553,000. The typical price in Salt Lake is $520,000. In Phoenix, it's $392,000. If we go to California, oh boy, it's really bad. Los Angeles, it's $824,000. San Francisco, it's 1.3 million. Seattle, it's 668,000. So basically, on the western side of the U.S., prices are really expensive. And if you are a home buyer or investor looking for value and affordability, you're going to struggle finding it on the West Coast. However, if we look at the Midwest and the Southeast, we see a sea of green, which means lots and lots of affordability. If we go to a market like St. Louis, Missouri, the typical home price is only $217,000. That's 6 times lower than it is in San Francisco. If we go to a place like Birmingham, Alabama, the typical home price is barely over $200,000. That means it's 4 times cheaper than LA. If we go to Oklahoma City, the typical price is $185,000, which means that it's 3 times cheaper than Austin, Texas. And so what this means is that there are still plenty of pockets of value and affordability for you as a home buyer or real estate investor to look into here in September 2021. And what I'm going to do for you guys by the end of this video is narrow this massive map of 500 housing markets down to the 5 housing markets that offer the best combination of affordability and growth potential. These are going to be the ones where you can find brand new homes for close to $200,000 and get good cash flow if you're a real estate investor. Now, we need to be very clear about something, folks. Affordability is extremely important. And in fact, it might be the most important thing that you need to be looking into as a potential home buyer or real estate investor here in 2021. And why is that? It's because the affordable markets will be the ones that will likely display more resilience in the upcoming housing crash compared to the expensive market. But we need to address the elephant in the room, everyone. And I can already tell a lot of you are thinking about this, and that's the relationship between affordability and desirability. And these things are often at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Real estate markets that are more desirable tend to be more expensive and less affordable. At the other end of the spectrum, markets that are less desirable tend to be more affordable. And so that means that you don't necessarily want to just go buying in a market just because it's cheap, because there could be very good reasons that it's cheap. It might have a declining population, job losses, a lot of violent crime. And for those reasons, even though it's cheap, you wouldn't necessarily want to buy there. So we need to find a way to separate the affordable markets that are intriguing and offer growth potential from the affordable markets that you really want to stay away from. And that's what we're going to do right now. And so on this graph, we're comparing two key variables that help proxy this relationship of affordability and desirability. On the x-axis, we're looking once again at the typical home price in America across markets. This is data that comes from Zillow, and this is proxying affordability. The higher the price is, the less affordable. The cheaper the price is, the more affordable. On the y-axis, we're looking at job growth over the last 5 years, and this is our proxy for desirability. The more job growth there is in a market, the better the economy, the more wages are going up, the more new stores, new things are opening, the more desirable a market is. The lower the job growth, the less desirable the market is. And I want you to pay particular attention to the color coding of the markets on this graph in the different quadrants. We're going to start in the top right, the yellow markets. Places like Boise, Idaho, Austin, Texas, Reno, Nevada, Salt Lake City, and Phoenix, Arizona. These markets are expensive. They have high home prices, but they are also desirable. They have a lot of job growth. And so if you want to buy real estate in these markets and you want to be part of the job growth and desirability, you have to pay a high price. And that's something I don't necessarily think is an advisable thing to do at the peak of a housing bubble. A lot of these markets in the top right have huge price downside. If you guys are enjoying the data and the content in this video so far and you want to see more of it going forward, then just make sure to hit that like button. When you hit the like button, it gets me a little more exposure on YouTube, which in turn helps me produce more of these videos going forward. So smash that like button. Additionally, make sure to leave a comment. What are you seeing in the housing market as a buyer, renter, investor? When you guys comment, it makes these videos better. All right, let's get back to it. At the other end of the spectrum are the markets in the bottom left. These are the ones that are affordable, but not so desirable because they have lots of job losses. Places like Lake Charles, Louisiana, Rockford, Illinois, Youngstown, Ohio, Charleston, West Virginia. Yeah, they're cheap. Typical home price of $100,000, $130,000. But yet their job counts have declined by 10% over the last 5 years, which means there's problems in this city. The economy isn't doing very well. It's likely that there's probably an uptick in crime due to all the job loss. It's probably not a place that you want to be as a home buyer or real estate investor. But really what I want you all to focus on is the top left of this graph. Because this is the sweet spot. These are the markets that are affordable with cheap home prices, but also with decent job growth and desirability. Places like Spartanburg, South Carolina, Warner Robins, Georgia, McAllen, Texas, Springfield, Missouri, and Florence, South Carolina. You can buy at a cheap price in these places and also get the benefits of strong job growth and increasing desirability. And so what we're going to do over the rest of this video is dig further into these markets in green, not just the ones that are called out, but also all these other green dots, and figure out the ones that offer you as a home buyer and investor the best combination of affordability, desirability, and cash flow. Now, that last point, cash flow, is also really important to consider because I know for a fact that a lot of you out there are potential real estate investors, right? You have some money saved up in the bank and you want to put that money to work by buying an investment property, buying a home and renting it out. And what do you want? You want cash flow and yield and profit from day one from that investment. And this is where affordable markets are also great because generally speaking, the more affordable the city, the cheaper the home prices are, the higher the yields and the profits you can earn from cash flow day one. You can actually buy a property in an affordable market and earn money in return the first month that you rent it. This is not the case in many expensive markets in America. Think of those markets that are on the west coast of the map we looked at originally. In these places, if you were to buy the typical home and rent at the typical rent, you're probably not getting any cash flow after you pay your debt service, but in affordable markets you are. And you can see that represented on this graph where we're looking at the top markets for rental yield in America. And what rental yield is we're taking the typical annual rent in the market, which is data that comes from apartmentlist.com, and we're dividing it by the typical home price. So if you buy the typical home and rent it out at the typical rent, what type of rental yield are you going to get? And we're actually going to start all the way at the bottom here, so I can show you the other end of the spectrum, the markets where you're going to get no cash flow, no return, and why you want to avoid them. And we see places like San Jose and San Francisco, where the typical annual rent is around $34,000 compared to a typical home value of $1.5 million. That's a rental yield of 2.3%, and that's not very good. So if you were to buy a property in San Jose or San Francisco or places like Provo, Utah, Los Angeles, Boulder, Colorado, Boise, Idaho, Seattle, Washington, Salt Lake City, if you were to buy in any of these markets and rent it out, your rental yields are going to be 3 to 4%, and that's even before deducting expenses. So you're still going to have to deduct property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and mortgage interest. And generally speaking, in all these markets in red at the bottom, you're going to be getting zero cash flow or even negative cash flow if you buy an investment property. You might even have to come out of pocket after you rent it out to cover the costs. Now, if we scroll up this graph, we can see that the rental yields get better and better, and that the higher you go, the more cash flow you're going to get from day one as a real estate investor. And the typical market in America, the rental yield is around 6.6% out of the box. These would be places like Cincinnati, Ohio, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Kansas City, Missouri, New Orleans would be markets that offer you standard mid-sixes rental yields. But we want even better rental yields, so let's go higher. Let's actually go all the way to the top of this list. And we can see here are the best cash flow markets in America. Places like Columbus, Georgia, where out of the box you're going to get a 10.6% rental yield. Fayetteville, North Carolina, 10.2% rental yield. Mobile, Alabama, 9.8%. If we go down the list, we see Shreveport, Louisiana, Corpus Christi, Fort Smith, Arkansas, El Paso, Texas, Tallahassee, Florida, Montgomery, Alabama, Columbia, South Carolina. If you're an investor and you want cash flow from day one, these are markets that you should certainly consider. And high cash flows are actually beneficial in multiple ways for both real estate investors as well as home buyers, people who aren't even renting out your home. You will benefit from buying into a high cash flow market, and here's why. And that's because high rental yields and cash flows will discourage investors from selling their homes during the housing crash. So think about this, right? We have a housing crash, prices start going down. One of the biggest risk factors for a market is that all of a sudden investor owners say, hey, there's a housing crash, I'm going to sell my home, flood the market with inventory. That is much less likely to occur in a high rental yield market because the investors in these high rental yield markets say, hey, I can accept appreciation going down a little because I'm earning good cash flow. At the other end of the spectrum, if we go to San Francisco or Provo or Seattle or Salt Lake City or Austin, where the cash flows are very low, investors in those markets are going to be much more likely to all of a sudden sell and flood the market with inventory when the crash occurs. So I want you to think about high cash flows and yields as important for you as an investor, but also important for the stability of the housing market in general, because higher cash flow yields mean it is less likely that we experience a big housing crash. And so you guys have been very patient sticking with me through this video so far, and now here's the payoff. We're going to use the 3 data points that we've evaluated so far: affordability, job growth, and cash flow yield. We're going to combine these metrics into one and find the 5 markets that offer the best combination. These are the 5 places where you can go as a home buyer or real estate investor and feel secure buying in 2021. And you can even find brand new homes for around $200,000. So let's whittle that map of 500 metro areas down to the top 5. And the first filter we're going to apply is for typical home price. So we're going to eliminate any market in America that has a typical home price according to Zillow of over $200,000. So we're only going to look at markets with typical home price below $200 grand. Let's make that filter happen. All right, and you can see we just kicked out a lot of different housing markets. Basically, everything on the western side of America is gone. It's too expensive for us to consider. We also kicked out a lot of stuff in the Northeast. A lot of coastal Northeast areas are gone, as are a lot of parts of Florida are now gone. We're primarily looking at the Midwest and the Southeast. But now we need to go a step further, because if you remember our conversation from earlier, just because a market is cheap doesn't mean we necessarily want to buy there. A place like Corpus Christi, yeah, the typical price is $191,000, but its job count has declined by 5% over the last 5 years. We probably don't want to consider it. A place like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is cheap. Typical price of $197,000. Jobs have declined, though, by 3.5% over the last 5 years. A place like Wichita, Kansas, typical price of $167,000, very cheap, but we've lost 4.4% of our jobs the last 5 years. We're going to kick this one out. So we want a minimum job growth of basically zero. We want to ensure that jobs at the very least are flat over the last 5 years in these markets, or that they've grown. So let's apply the job growth filter. So the remaining markets here are affordable and desirable. Affordable and desirable, which is a key point. But remember, we also want to consider cash flow. We want to make sure that if we're a real estate investor, we can get in and earn at least what I'm going to say is a 7.5% rental yield from day one. And so you can see we have about 20 or 25 markets now left on this list that are affordable, that are growing, and that have high rental yields. To get this down to the final 5, we're going to say let's only look at markets that are in the top 100 in population in America. The top 100, this is larger, more mature markets that are less likely to have a big downturn. And here is what we are left with. The top 5 markets for value growth, affordability would be, going from east to west: Winston-Salem, North Carolina; Augusta, Georgia; Memphis, Tennessee; Oklahoma City; and El Paso, Texas. These are places that even in the bubble-driven times of 2021, you could still buy at a cheap price, rent it out for a good cash flow, and be in a growing economy. These are the ones that are most likely to survive the upcoming housing crash and give you good fundamentals as a home buyer looking for a more affordable place to move, or a real estate investor looking for good value and cash flow. Some markets that just missed the cut based on certain filters include Little Rock, Arkansas; McAllen, Texas; and Greensboro, North Carolina. And so what we did in this video was use very fundamental analysis, very fundamental data to narrow down 500 housing markets in America and find the 5 that still make sense from a fundamental perspective to either buy a home or a real estate investment property right now in the bubble-driven times of 2021. And I think what I would encourage a lot of you to do who are looking for a new market to potentially move to, especially if you work remote, or a new market to invest in that offers value, is be open-minded about where you're going to consider. Don't just follow the herd and go where everyone else is going. You're going to need to go where other people aren't looking, the diamond in the rough markets, in order to find value. And as an own personal anecdote, I live in Austin, Texas, one of the hottest markets that everyone talks about in America, and I visited Oklahoma City last month and spent a week there. I was shocked in a very good way, very pleasantly surprised about how nice Oklahoma City was, and I was like, this is a place I could see myself living in. I would have never thought that before I went there. And the point being is that many of these secondary, tertiary markets that are still affordable are good places to live, are good places to invest. It's just not in the mainstream narrative yet, so you're only going to know if you look at the data. You're only going to know if you take a trip there and visit. So that's what I would encourage a lot of you to do. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, I love bringing the data on housing markets across America. If you appreciate it and want to see more of these videos going forward, first, make sure you're a subscriber. I come out with 3 of these data-driven videos per week on housing markets across America. Additionally, if you really enjoy this content, think of joining and becoming a sponsor member. The cost is $5 a month. You support the channel financially, and you get some very, very cool perks. There's an exclusive members-only community board where I tease videos, post polls asking you which videos I should do, and I also release a members-only exclusive newsletter, which you can now see on the screen, once per month, along with an accompanying members-only video that covers all of the data in the U.S. housing market, as well as my exclusive insights. So if you want to be a part of that, you like this content, make sure to join also and become a channel member. Until next time, everyone, this is Nick from eVenture Consulting, signing off.